Tonight's webinar is by eSight Corporation. eSight are breakthrough electronic glasses that enable the legally blind to actually see, allowing them to be mobile and independently perform virtually all activities of daily living. Notably, eSight is the only clinically validated and wearable medical device in the world able to enhance the functional vision of those living with low vision. eSight works for the overwhelming majority of the legally blind population. Earlier this month, Time magazine named eSight 3 as one of the best inventions of 2017. Your speakers tonight are Mr. Rob Hilkes and Ms. Carly Martin. Rob Hilkes is Vice President of Clinical and Regulatory Affairs. He began his tech career 30 years ago with NCR. A graduate of electrical engineering, Rob's mission has always been to align strategic customers with what's technologically possible. He's held executive positions in marketing, business development, and product management. In 2007, after many years in high-performance imaging systems and semiconductors, Mr. Hilkes became eSight's founding employee with a vision to help the visually impaired see just as well as the rest of us. Mr. Hilkes is currently responsible for clinical and regulatory affairs, working closely with a network of partners worldwide to ensure eSight technology can be made available to the multitudes who can benefit from better vision. Carly is the Director of Stakeholder Outreach at eSight Eyewear. Carly is responsible for the development and management of eSight's relationship with key stakeholders, including government, educational institutions, associations, and patient groups. Welcome, Mr. Hilkes and Ms. Martin.
Thank you. So I guess that is my cue to talk. That was a very impressive introduction. I hope I can live up to all that. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to spend with Carly the next little while talking to you about eSight and our experience thus far. And also, I'm very interested in obviously people's questions and feedback, because you as vision care professionals, it's very important for me and for the rest of the team here to listen to your input so that we can guide the company and the product direction appropriately. So without further ado, this is a presentation that we prepared that sort of tells you a little bit about the history of eSight, where we've come from and what we've accomplished, and something about clinical indications and results. Yeah, so here we go. And Carly and I will kind of play off of each other so that you don't fall asleep listening to just one voice. Next slide.
Whenever you're ready, you gotta be comfortable.
Exciting.
Ready? Okay. Unbelievable. I can actually see your I can see it. I can see your whole face. I can see your eyebrows and your eyes. This is for the rest of your life. That's incredible.
Than I will ever know. But I can say, hand on heart, that I've seen many of these kinds of customer experiences firsthand. They don't always happen, of course. But when they do, it's a pretty rich experience, and it's been very humbling for us. so as you can imagine, when you start to be able to show and share stories like this, you get a lot of buzz in the media. And so you can see here on the slide that our marketing folks have put together a whole bunch of logos of various news media outlets where eSight has received coverage. So next slide. I don't want to get too commercial here. We just last week were actually reported by Time Magazine as one of the top 10 or 20, I can't remember. Do you remember, Carly? Inventions of 2017, which is really quite amazing. Next slide. So I'd like to just step back into reality and ask or talk with you all a little bit about what eSight actually is. So next slide, please. I tend to be a fairly down-to-earth person. So when our marketing folks come up with an audacious statement like helping the legally blind to actually see, I have an aversion to that kind of thing, I have to admit. But in fact, I have seen circumstances where people's lives have been dramatically changed by this device. So that's pretty amazing. Really, if we go back to as far back as the 80s, some of you who are as old as I am will remember the kind of holy grail concept for a low vision device has always been something that's a highly intuitive device that you wear hands-free on your face in front of your eyes that basically accentuates what your retina and your visual system is capable of doing to help you with all manner of day-to-day activities of daily living. So, the mantra is hands-free, any kind of object distance, whether it's a near task like reading or distance task like looking at your grandson kicking the soccer ball or whatever, and everything in between. At any level of magnification you want, automatically focused all the time, and so forth. That has been the holy grail. And this idea has existed for decades, ever since we engineers thought that it was conceivable to create something like this. What I should say, though, is that every previous attempt, in our opinion, has been either enormous or inadequate. Enormous meaning it makes you look and sound like Darth Vader. Inadequate meaning they've got the form factor right, but the performance is not there. And then on the next slide, you go ahead and move the slides. We can see some of the previous incarnations of this. So some of you might have remembered a device called the Low Vision Enhancement System, ELVIS, designed back in the 80s, led primarily by Dr. Robert Massoff at Wilmer at the Hopkins University in Baltimore. A decade later, Enhanced Vision Systems in California came up with something called the Jordy, which was really a Sony block camera, CCTV camera, put into a head-mounted form factor. And it was a pretty basic kind of thing. And there were other attempts. You can see something from Keeler in the 90s. They called it the New Vision. And even Vuzix, which was a consumer head-worn display with a really, really tiny field of view. They launched something about 15 years ago or 10 years ago called the LV920. All of these things were, I would say, attempts. And some of them were moderately commercially successful. Most of them were flops. The most effective of those devices was the ELVIS, but as you can see from the physical form factor, it was something that your average person was not about to go and wear, certainly not in public. This continues to today. It's very, very tempting as any technology company to leverage the sort of technology that's available for head-worn displays, and you can see some of them here. There's a lot going on in the head-worn display industry right now because of things like gaming and augmented reality, and you've all heard of things like Google Glass and things like that. And some of the low vision companies are trying to take those hardware platforms and develop applications for low vision that would sit on those hardware platforms. And you can see some of those here. They result usually in something that's, in our opinion, not adequate. And there's many ways to measure what we mean by adequate. It might be things like frame rate, the level of zoom, certainly the form factor, so the size and the comfort and the fit and the aesthetics of the thing, the resolution, the field of view, all of these things. It's only eSight, as far as we know, in the industry, you can advance the slide, that has been designed from the ground up to specifically deal with the low vision problem. And when we set out to do this 10 years ago, we were looking specifically at maculopathies more than anything. So diseases like macular degeneration, Stargardt's disease, cone rod dystrophy, and so forth. And what you see here on this slide is eSight in the top picture, compared with a bunch of the other sort of what I would say commercial off-the-shelf head-worn displays that are attempts at a head-worn low-vision device for that incorporates a live video camera. We think what we have done is achieved what I would call the best kind of balance between aesthetics, the field of view, which is how many angular minutes the display, minutes of subtense the display uses of your retina, the level of zoom and acuity of the camera itself, and so forth. And you can see on the right in these pictures how we compare with some of these other devices. Something that I would point out that's very, very critical is you'll notice that only the eSight device, which is kind of funny that we have a black one as well, but I put the white one in here so we kind of stand out, I suppose. Only eSight can you see the person's eyes. And what we're doing there is we have incorporated into our device something we call bioptic tilt, which means you can choose to be as immersive or as bioptic as you choose to be for the task at hand. And this is very, very important because it enables much better mobility. It enables socialization by facilitating eye contact and so forth. And all of these other devices are something that you wear basically in front of your face. You can see the bottom one is kind of rather ridiculous in my opinion. That is a standard virtual reality headset, of which by now there are dozens, that kids use for gaming and things like that. And of course, it's very tempting, as I said, to stick a low vision application, basically a magnification application, into that kind of a platform. The chart, by the way, shows the level of system, what we call system acuity, which is what kind of line chart, what kind of level you can read on a Snellen chart or an ETDRS chart, versus the level of magnification that you dialed into the system. And we feel like, first of all, you must get down to 2010 or better, visual acuity, but we also feel like a range of magnification that's somewhere between 1 or close to 1 and about 15 times is probably optimum. If you go beyond that on a head-worn device, it kind of gets ridiculous because you can't hold your head still enough. And so eSight, you can see, is the green line in there. We go from just below 1 to about 20, which is probably further than people need to go, magnification. And we can, with people with low vision, can read the 2010 line on a Snellen chart or an ETDRS chart. Next slide. I will try to go quickly because we got a late start here. I would say one of the things that we were very aware of from the beginning, we collaborated with, as I said, we're a bunch of stupid engineers, so we collaborated with pretty smart ophthalmologists and optometrists who had a lot of experience in low vision rehabilitation and low vision research. People like Dr. Graham Strong, who might even be listening, I don't know, from the University of Waterloo, Dr. John Granda in Ottawa, ophthalmologists at Queen's University. We did go back to Bob Massoff at Hopkins, who, as you recall, was responsible for that Elvis device back in the 80s, and so forth. What these guys were telling us was, let's go back to the beginning, the first principles, and talk about what kind of a device you would want to address maculopathies. So, as you know better than we do, the field of view that is addressed by your macular vision and that is affected by diseases like Stargardt's and AMD and CRD and so forth, covers about 18 or 20 degrees of your field of view. So we actually, and as you know, most of these patients maintain peripheral vision that is every bit as good as yours and mine. And so what we set out to do is to create a display that had a field of view that was only slightly larger than this and intentionally not bigger, because we did not want to rob people of their perfectly good habitual peripheral vision. And so this is why you see on the slide here, we played around with, okay, how does your acuity drop off as you deviate from the foveal central vision? What does the acuity of a device like this need to be if we are to address this 18 or 20 degrees of your central macular vision that is lost, and so forth? And that's where we, that was the basis point for the eSight design. So the next slide. So this very last bullet is quite important. We heard time and again from you folks, the experts, and also from patients with our very, very early proof of concept prototypes, which were big, monstrous devices. Please, for goodness sake, help me with my macular vision issues, but do not rob me of my peripheral vision, because that's what I use for walking and for navigating the world around me, and it's just as good as yours. It's my peripheral vision that helps me to see the chocolate chip that I dropped on the kitchen floor. That's not my foveal vision, it's my peripheral vision that sees that. Now you have to give me a device that helps my foveal vision to pick it up. And that's what we set out to do. So next slide. And there's some time. I'm actually in Sao Paulo today, so there's some time delay between me saying next slide and the slides actually advancing. Okay, so here you see what we call a constellation. A constellation is a word that I learned from Dr. Strong in Waterloo. You know, there are, as you know, for any low vision patient, there are a number of devices that they can use that are all pretty ADL specific, activity of daily living specific. They're very highly optimized devices for a certain task. And what eSight seeks to accomplish, and you can advance the slide here, is to create a device which, as I said, works for any distance, is hands-free, is variable zoom, is automatic focus, so that the goal is you can use eSight for any or all of those tasks. And we do have patients or clients or users, as we like to call them, who will attest that their bag full of assistive technology devices that they historically used now sits in their night table because they can confidently use eSight for all of those activities. And that, I mean, that thrills us because it means we managed to accomplish something. Next slide. I'll spend a couple of slides here just to go through the very basics of what it is. You can see here eSight comprises two parts. There's the part that you wear on your head like a pair of glasses, that and very importantly, it pivots up and down. So we call that bioptic tilt. And if your bum is in a chair and you're watching a movie, you will choose to be very immersive with this device. So you're kind of immersive and antisocial in your own private world of watching that movie. If you get up and walk around or socialize with people, you will choose to tip it up 10 or 15 degrees, and then it becomes a bioptic device where you are using your habitual peripheral vision for 80 or 85% of the time, and then when you need to see detail, you just tip your head ever so slightly forward and look up into the video screens, and it's like a optical bioptic, like an Occutech device or Designs for Vision device, that kind of thing. The part that you hold in your hand, which is connected by a wire, holds all of the controls, of course, but also importantly, it holds the batteries. We could not put 2 hours of battery life onto the bridge of your nose without making you uncomfortable. So the batteries and the controls are in the handheld piece, and all of the optics and actually the computer itself are up on your head. We have designed 2 non-uniform aspherical prisms. This is our own custom prism design, and that's what lets your eyes and your brain, frankly, see the displays, even though they're only an inch in front of your face. Those prisms collimate the light, and so what we say to practitioners is eSight is used with a person's distance ophthalmic prescription. Even for a near task like reading, you are still using your distance prescription. So we integrate the person's eyeglasses prescription into the device, and in that sense, it becomes a custom device. We also set the pupil distance so that the exit pupil of our display and the prism system is properly aligned with the person's biological pupil. And you can see some other specs here. 21.5 megapixel camera, so it's a very high resolution camera, and that's frankly what allows the device to be so aesthetically small. It's because we have such a high resolution camera that we don't need a whole lot of moving optics to achieve 20 times zoom. The other thing where we spent a lot of development effort is to reduce the latency. I can attest to you from personal experience, our early prototypes successfully made people sick. And that was because the latency between reality and what we were presenting to the person's eyes was too long, and they would develop motion sickness. So our latency is down to the point where it's almost imperceptible, and that took a lot of development effort. You cannot do that with a simple off-the-shelf head-worn display and a computer. It required a lot of nitty-gritty work by our engineers to achieve that. Next slide, please. This is just more detail. I probably won't spend a lot of time here. I would say if you go down to the third bullet there, 3 operating modes. The most intuitive one is where you're looking at the world through the camera. But there are 2 other ones. We allow users to freeze whatever it is they're looking at. This is particularly useful when you're reading. So of course you can read through the camera, but you can also take a picture of what you wish to read. And then once you've captured that picture, you can zoom in and apply different contrast algorithms, kind of like a CCTV reader, black, white, yellow, black, blue, white, whatever. And you can zoom in, zoom out, and even do text-to-speech and OCR, optical character recognition, and speech synthesis, and have a document read to you. So those are all things you can do with a frozen image of text. And then the third way of using this device is you can, of course, connect directly any HDMI video signal. So from your cable modem, your set-top box, or your computer, and it essentially bypasses the camera. And this device becomes like a wearable television or a wearable computer monitor. We have a guy at eSight in our Ottawa office who has retinopathy of prematurity. I think his visual acuity is about 20/500 or something like that. He has on his desk a computer keyboard and a mouse and no monitor. And he gets funny looks when people walk by his office because they see a guy working away on his computer, but he has no screen. And the reason is he's wearing his screen. He wears eSight all day long as his computer monitor. That's his preference. Other people want to use a computer by viewing it through the camera. There are as many user profiles as there are users, I would say. But I wanted to draw your attention to those 3 different modes of operating. Next slide, please. I'm trying to scoot along. This slide shows something about visual field. Our visual field is 37.5 degrees horizontal. It's a 4:3 screen. So that's about 30 degrees, 37.5 diagonal, I beg your pardon, 30 degrees horizontal. What this slide just shows is different regular day-to-day activities and how they translate to the subtense angle on your retina. So if you're looking at a 5-foot diagonal television, which is a big television, from the other side of the living room, 8 feet away, it's about the same size. If you're in a movie theater and you're looking at a 40-foot movie screen and you're 50 feet back, 15 rows back from the screen, it's about the same size. If you're holding a letter size or A4 size piece of paper at your arm's length, it's about the same size, a little smaller. These are all different activities that basically occupy just a little bit more than the size of your macular vision. And so what we like to say is if people have a much significantly smaller field of view than this, then their chances of success with eSight actually diminish. So patients with late-stage glaucoma or advanced retinitis pigmentosa, for example, we like to set the expectations of those people carefully, because if you have tunnel vision, there's a good chance that eSight is not going to be very effective. The next slide, please. I compared eSight with some other devices. For example, in the top you see a couple of different handheld LCD magnifiers. These are devices from places like Freedom Scientific or Enhanced Vision, for example. They're very good devices. What I'm trying to show here is at the same level of magnification, the field of view that that device provides to your vision, compared to on the right, eSight. So those devices are 10 degrees or maybe 15 degrees of field of view when they're held at the right distance from the page, whereas eSight is covering the width of the page for the same, again, for the same level of magnification, so the same size of font. Another device, another activity that we really like to talk about is reading music. So you can see here, for example, somebody reading piano sheet music, which is about 2 feet away, through an optical spectacle-mounted bioptic telescope, they will get maybe 7 degrees of visual field in a 6x bioptic, whereas again with eSight you get a 30-degree field. Plus, of course, what I didn't show here is you can do all kinds of things like contrast enhancement and invert the video to be white on black and so forth. So again, you see the benefit of having this this level. Basically, it's a slightly larger than macular field of view. Next slide, please. I as the clinical research head at eSight will attest that we are flabbergasted with how well eSight works for some users, and we are still learning a little bit about how this thing actually works and what the method of physiological action is that allows eSight to work. We have some users who will hand on heart attest that their visual scotoma has disappeared. And of course, we all know that that's not possible. A scotoma is a biological thing. You can't make it disappear. But this is what their vision system is telling them. And so there are really a bunch of theories that we have about why that might be the case. But the importance of contrast is really key here. In speaking with some neuro-ophthalmologists and trying to understand the structure and the behavior of photoreceptors and ganglion cell structures in the human retina, we have surmised that by increasing contrast, you basically can generate a synaptic response from neighboring ganglion cells by having these sharp yes, no, yes, or dark, white, dark transitions in the visual material that you're looking at. And that's, if you think about it, that's really the definition of what contrast is. And so a couple of dormant ganglion cells, which are seeing a gradual change in contrast, might not do anything. Suddenly, if they see a sharp change in contrast, they may both wake up and fire off synaptic messages to the cerebral cortex. And that is what we think is part of what's going on in the brain. The other aspect is temporal changes, and all of these are potential areas of research for us because it's hypothesis at the moment. But you know, as a contrast region moves across the retina, then the photoreceptors and the ganglion cells in your eye see transitions from light to dark, which will also stimulate brain activity. And so this is all by way of saying contrast, which is something that you achieve most effectively with video processing algorithms, as opposed to optical lenses, is something that we believe is very, very important. Next slide. I'm going way too slow. Just very quickly, in terms of demographics, we now have 1,600 users. It might even be more. That's the last number I heard. They generally range in the range of acuity from about 20/70, 20/80 to about 2800. We do, of course, have outliers that are better or worse than that range, but that's a rule of thumb that we use. We have users that range in age from 4. Our youngest is 4. Our oldest is 101, and everything in between, obviously. Our challenge with very young kids is typically their head size and their PD. The minimum PD on our device, I believe, is 52 millimeters. So if a kid has a smaller, tighter PD than that, they can be a challenge. With the very elderly, it's usually comorbidities that come into play, like neuroplasticity issues, dexterity, they have arthritis, they have a little bit of dementia, and so forth. So elderly people will sometimes take a little bit more TLC to get eSight to work effectively. Next slide, please. I'm kind of repeating myself here, but the list of diseases is very long. Of course, many different types of macular dysfunction, but also we've seen diabetic retinopathy. I just had the pleasure today here in Brazil of showing eSight to a father and son who are both have ocular albinism, and both had amazing results. I think the father will not buy it because he's set in his ways, and the son will buy it because I thought it was pretty amazing. But you can see a long list of diseases there. We tend to focus not on disease diagnosis, but rather on visual functions. So what is your acuity? What is your field of view? Those are the two most important factors. Next slide, please. Blah, blah, blah. So eSight is a medical device. We're approved in Canada and the US, and now in Europe as of June of this year. And now each and every country that we go into, we need to go through all of the regulatory hurdles that give us permission to import the device into that geography. And we're doing that. So the next slide here shows a map of the world, which we are trying our best to conquer. So the 1500 is old, and that's now 1600. So there you go. Next slide.
We're here at Pine River Schools to do something incredible. We're about to surprise Serenity Ogg, a legally blind girl, with a gift of sight.
I would love to be able to see my bestest friend in the entire world for the first time clearly.
Over 1,000 people came together to raise money for Serenity's eSight, electronic glasses that will help her actually see.
Good morning! We have a saying at eSight: everyone deserves to see. As it turns out, every single individual here today believes that a really special girl named Serenity Ogg deserves to see. On behalf of everyone at eSight, am so excited to give Serenity the gift of sight. Dare I ask how it looks, Serenity?
Amazing.
We asked Serenity what she would want to see the most, and she said more than anything in the world, she wants to see her best friend. You want one more surprise? Your friend Kylie drove 26 hours to be here today to see
Carly, and I'm gonna have a drink of water. Go ahead, Carly.
Thank you so much for that. So I want to tell you a little bit about how we make trying eSight an opportunity for clients and for your patients as well. And then talk a little bit about how we provide training and then give you 3 different examples of patients. We have built in an interactive component to this, but I'll walk you through it. So next slide. All right, so we have about 3 different ways right now that someone might be able to try eSight. Well, sorry, 2 ways to try eSight. And then, of course, first and foremost, if someone hears about eSight, whether they're recommended by a friend, by an optometrist, ophthalmologist, the low vision specialist, we do about a 20-30 minute screening phone call with them. So we're taking this kind of information like, what is their condition? What is their current visual acuity? When was the last time they received a prescription? Just how old is that prescription? Also talking about what kind of tools they're using, what kind of goals they have. And from what Rob said earlier, eSight being disease agnostic, sometimes it's a matter of not just what disease you have, but how it presents and what your experience is. Once we've had that discussion, if someone lives within Toronto or Ottawa, where we have offices and do provide demonstrations, and most of our demonstrations in Ontario are out of those 2 locations, we may arrange a 15-20 minute demo for them to try eSight. But increasingly what we're doing is we're doing a home trial program. We have 2 weeks to try eSight, put it on. We provide training and we kind of walk you through, and you receive the support and the ability to figure out if this is the right tool, not just for your condition, but also for your lifestyle. Much easier to assess that than, say, within a 15-20 minute session. So we're doing much more of that. We're receiving really positive feedback. If we go to the next slide. A big component of what we at eSight are providing is training and support. So for that patient of yours who might be interested in trying eSight, so first and foremost, you have your session with them. We would then have a follow-up. We connect with them. We have a call. We set up the home trial. All we need from them to set that up is their pupil distance and if they have a distance prescription. We make sure that the trial classes that they're receiving are set up with their pupil distance, and we provide them with their distance prescription. And on the day that they receive eSight, we arrange for a one-on-one Skype session. So with our setup session, usually about 45 minutes to an hour, have another person there, help them set up to Wi-Fi, and we can connect, get them up and running, show them what the controls do. And we set 1 to very small, easy to manage goals. What we set a 15-year-old up to do is going to be different than what we set an 85-year-old up to do. So we set some goals specific to them. And then 3 days later, we have a follow-up call, check in, see how they did, see what else we can do. So when we get someone through that trial program by the end of those 2 weeks, they have a good sense of if it's the right tool for them. Now, if they do decide to keep eSight, to purchase it, then they have access to our ambassador program. So this is a network of individuals who wear eSight, who are eSight employees, and they are able to connect remotely with the individual who is using eSight. So we can Skype in. If I were the trainer, I would see what the individual is seeing. I'll see what they're seeing. And so I can see, sorry, Mr. Jones, your eSight actually is pointed at the wrong direction, or, okay, I understand why you're having concerns. Let's let's play with the magnification. And we can troubleshoot together and figure out what's going on. And again, these are individuals who are wearing eSight, so they know all the tricks, all the ins and outs. So whether they're working with a 93-year-old or whether they're working with that 22-year-old, they're going to be able to help them in wildly different ways depending on their goals. So I always love the example of the university student who was trying to figure out how can I sit wherever I want to in an auditorium and not worry about the curly hair of the person in front of me triggering my autofocus. So there's a way to fix that. We can, put it into manual, and then you can zoom past and then fix it. Like there's ins and outs and tricks to figuring these things out, and you have access to that one-on-one trainer. So that's really important and a big part of what we provide. The next one. So I want to give just 3 quick examples. So we were going to do a bit of a polling session here, but instead just shout it into the abyss if you have the answer. Client example number 1, he's 52, he has Stargardt's. Vision's about 20, 200. He likes technology, he's comfortable with it. He probably used to be the one who fixed the VCR, less so today. But doesn't have a distance prescription as far as he knows. He's our primary point of contact. He's the one who initiated the discussion about eSight in the first place, and he wants to use eSight to get back to work, to read, to watch sports again. So take a guess as to whether or not this would be a potential candidate. Never mind the photo that we're showing you. Yeah, go ahead. So in this particular instance, eSight was very successful for him. Because he was quite comfortable with technology, that's usually a good indicator. This particular individual actually is an electrical engineer, so understanding magnification, the device became quite intuitive for him very quickly. He also had a very supportive family, very supportive team in place. They rallied around him, they encouraged him to use it. They were embarrassed if he wanted to go to a restaurant and put it on to read a menu. Those sorts of things make a big difference. It turns out he did have a prescription. We were able to extend the trial so that we could then have his prescription sent in. Surprising how often that actually happens. But if you aren't worried about ever seeing at a distance, the years go by and you don't realize that you actually require that distance prescription. So it's something that if you have a candidate or client who you think might be interested in eSight, do check that distance prescription. It actually ends up being quite important. And he was able to do what he wanted to do. We could achieve his goals for him, and so as a result, he decided to keep eSight, including watching football on TV. So next one. Our second candidate that will speak to you, another man, 89 years old, macular degeneration. Visual acuity actually a bit better, 20 over 160. He does use computers. He has some magnification, not doing a whole lot, but is using them. Does have a distance prescription, did provide us with that. It was his daughter who initiated these discussions. In fact, her father, we never interacted with the father up until the first Skype call. And his goals were to watch television, to read, quality of life related goals primarily. So the guest here, in this instance, actually wasn't successful. And success being that, yes, it did improve his visual acuity, but it wasn't the right tool for him after all. So he chose not to keep eSight, even though he was on a trial. And this is in part because his visual acuity had actually dropped quite significantly since his last assessment, but his daughter hadn't been to that, so she didn't realize how long it had been. He had some comorbidities, including some mild dementia and arthritis, so it's difficult to use a controller. Short-term memory is important when running a new device like this. And so the daughter was very determined that this was the right tool for him. Unfortunately, with her not being in the same city, she wasn't around, she wasn't able to provide the kind of support that an individual at that age might typically require. So unfortunately, in this instance, it wasn't the right fit. And our third example, a male in age 83, macular degeneration. In this instance, his condition was 20 over 500. Good avid Facebook user. Had a distance prescription again, a couple years old, but brought it along with him. He initiated the conversation with us, motivated, sitting at church, quality of life, primarily mobility goals. So the guess here, I'll let you guess, success. And a big difference here between him and the last individual, even though his visual acuity was a little bit poor, is that his support team was there rallying around him. His wife, son, daughter, all were really motivated and keen to support him through this. He had really achievable goals. And we were able, because he was so keen to do the training, we were able to set little goals and move him along. So and he's also not shy. So he's happy to wear it at church, to wear it in front of the family, wear it with friends, to go out to the restaurant, to do those sorts of things. That positive attitude, desire to learn. So when the motivation comes from the individual, that's critically important, even though if you compare him, if you were just to read the slide before him and the slide before the last individual, you might have assumed that it would have been flipped. So Rob, it's back to you.
Okay, so I will take the last few minutes before Q&A to just go through a clinical study that we did. I did a multi-center prospective cohort study. It took up most of 2016. You can advance to the next slide. This took place at 4 locations in the US and 2 in Canada. And it was actually using our predecessor device, so what we call eSight 2, which is, it was twice as big and twice as heavy as eSight 3. But that's the device that we used for that trial. You can see the list of locations here, including Johns Hopkins, Kellogg in Detroit, University of Toronto and University of Montreal here in Canada. And I'll let you read the inclusion and exclusion criteria there. Next slide. The results were very, very compelling. Our primary outcome measure was the Veterans Administration Low Vision Visual Function Questionnaire, the VFQ 48. It was 48 questions. The nice thing about this instrument is it has nothing to do with the device under test. This is a questionnaire that assesses a person's confidence and satisfaction with various activities of daily living, regardless of whatever assistive technology they are or are not using. And so we administered that questionnaire pre-study and post-intervention right after fitting them with eSight and after 3 months of eSight use. And we'll see the results in a moment. We also, of course, because we could, we measured many other visual function aspects like acuity, contrast, reading speed, and so forth. We developed a homegrown facial recognition protocol and also some activities of daily living tests. So these were practical things like pouring water out of a jug and counting money and playing cards and things like that. Next slide. I hope this is showing some results. Oh, okay, so here's study demographics. I won't spend all the time here. A bunch of different diseases, age from 13 to 75, 51 people. Go ahead. So I'm going to show you a bunch of charts very quickly. But just to point out here, the red line is what we call baseline, which is their best performance without the eSight device, with whatever their habitual prescription is for distance correction. The blue line is immediately after we fitted them with eSight, and the green line is after 3 months of use at home, at school, at work, and so forth. Okay. Next slide. So there's two charts here. One is, and you can recognize these tests from the pictures on the right. One is an EDPRS visual acuity chart. There's a 7-line improvement, and that was instant. So that's why you see the green and blue lines are almost on top of each other because there was an instant improvement and not much additional improvement over extended use. Contrast performance, we took people from what we would call typically severe vision loss to something that was more or less what can be categorized as normal. Next slide. In terms of reading speed, again, 6-point font improvement. Here you saw a slight improvement over 3 months. That's the difference in the blue and the green line. And that's just an indication of people getting more confident with how to use the device. And the next chart is the activities of daily living, which again showed consistent, statistically significant improvement. Next slide. I think the next slide is the so this is the most important one. Again, because as I said, this has nothing to do with eSight really. It's more a measure of how satisfied someone is with their day-to-day living as a visually impaired person. And so here you see quite a significant difference between pre-study and after 3 months of eSight use in terms of their VFQ, overall VFQ scores. The VFQ tool, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's divided into 4 subcategories, which you see here: reading, visual information, visual motor, and mobility. In the first 3, there was significant improvement. In the last one, mobility, we were not looking for huge improvements. What we were looking for there is no detrimental effect, and we achieved that. And the reason I say that is because eSight is not really a mobility device. It's a wayfinding device. It's an orientation device for sure. It's not something that's a mobility device. We counsel people never to try to walk, for example, while looking through the video camera, because that's potentially a dangerous and disorienting activity. But we were very pleased that eSight did not hamper people's mobility. And that's primarily because of this bioptic industrial design, where people are, we were very deliberate about not occluding people's peripheral vision, especially the inferior, temporal, yes, but especially inferior peripheral vision. So their line of sight down to the ground with their peripheral vision is not occluded by the device, which is why we were able to maintain good mobility scores. Next slide. These results, by the way, we are hoping will be published in Optometry and Vision Science in the next, I'm hoping in the next month or 2, but it's with the jury. So overall conclusions, I mentioned the VFQ 48 scores were very, very satisfying. The various chart tests, you know, these are fun to report, but in the end, they're very clinical. These are doctor's office tests. They don't really necessarily have much bearing on how one's quality of life will change with the device. That's why the VFQ 48 was so important. But having said that, the results were very, very good. As I mentioned, the bioptic design did not impact mobility, which is great. We got critical feedback about ergonomics and industrial design and so forth. Now you'll remember I told you this was for the eSight 2 device, and we feel like we've made huge gains with eSight 3, which is the one that we're now selling. It's about half the size, half the weight. It's much more aesthetically appealing, and we hear that from our users. Next slide, please. Oh, so we're done. We started 15 minutes late, and we ended 9 minutes late. So that's good. Carly and I would love to entertain any questions that anybody might have. And you have our contact information here if you want to just fire us an email after the fact. We would love that.
We do have a couple questions that have come in. So the first one, I'll pass this one to you. Have you had success with patients who have RP or glaucoma?
It's a good question. And the answer is yes, we certainly have, but I would qualify it. So as you eye doctors know better than I do, there are various genetic strains of RP. So RP is kind of a catch-all for a number of genetic conditions. And as we said earlier, what we like to focus on is people's visual acuity and field of view. So the short answer is if you have RP or glaucoma, but you still maintain that sweet spot acuity, 2080 to 2800, something like that, and you have 10 or 15 degrees of field, then there's a very good chance that eSight is going to be beneficial. If your RP or your glaucoma has advanced to the point where you are experiencing extreme tunnel vision, then I would be very careful to set expectations with that customer that eSight will probably not work. So by tunnel vision, we mean, 3, 4, 5 degrees of visual field. That's a very poor indication. I should point out while we're on this topic of field, we often say, 10 or 15 degrees of usable field is desirable. I should point out it need not be foveal. So a lot of people who are viewing eccentrically have a preferred retinal location that's not foveal, are very effective users of eSight. So that 10 or 15 degrees that they use doesn't necessarily have to be centered.
All right. So a couple questions so we can get to them. So how much is eSight? So eSight is 12,500 Canadian right now. eSight 2, just for context, was 19,500. So we are investing in and ensuring that we can make eSight available. Another thing to flag is that we do have 3 individuals on staff who are committed to supporting individuals in accessing eSight. So that can be through setting up crowdfunding campaigns, helping them connect with potential grants, scholarships, other funding envelopes and opportunities for them to access support through. And we also do have a payment plan as well. We can program that if someone qualifies for, we can get into. Another one is, so in terms of locations where patients can go to try eSight, so the vast majority of demonstrations that we provide for eSight in Ontario are either done in Toronto or Ottawa. We do have some clinicians who can provide a demonstration, but the vast majority are in Toronto and Ottawa right now, and we are encouraging more people to participate in the home trial program. I would say if you have anyone today who is interested in trying eSight, the fastest route to connecting them would be to email myself or Rob, and we'll work with you. We are always looking to work directly with clinicians to figure out what the best process is for making eSight available to your patients. And that's something that we can do one-on-one for the time being, as it's something that we're constantly trying to improve and build out so that we have a more robust program. In terms of the home trial program, there is a cost of $500. There's a deposit of $500, and we do put a hold on the credit card, and that is a non-refundable down payment. Any other questions that have come in here? But Doc, will I be able to drive with eSight? Unfortunately, no. And Rob, I'll let you elaborate on that while I just look for one more, couple, maybe 2 more questions at a time here. It is a question that comes up with quite a bit.
As some of you might know, bioptic driving is actually legal in, I think it's now 48 of the 50 states in the US. The reason we do not sanction eSight for driving is because an optical bioptic device does not occlude as much of your superior field of view as eSight does. So we were very careful in the design to not block out people's temporal or inferior field of view. And of course, engineering is all about trade-offs. So the field of view that is affected is your superior field of view, which is exactly what you need when you are driving. So our best advice is not to drive when you are wearing eSight.
Thank you.
And in fact, when you turn eSight on, there's a warning message that comes up as the device turns on that says, "Don't drive." you might think or you might guess that our lawyers told us to put that there.
We do have quite a few people using eSight in the US, so that could be part of it. Another question came in. So you mentioned that the device could read text to you. Is this via connecting to a computer, or does eSight have a speaker embedded? So eSight does have a speaker embedded, and as of a recent software update, it is now you call OCR enabled. We do have brochures and pamphlets. In fact, they're in the handouts attached, so you have access to them. We also included some patient testimonials. Another question here. In the intro, you indicated that eSight may help people with nystagmus, but your clinical study didn't include anyone that had that disease. Can you elaborate? Rob, I'll pass that one.
Sure. Yeah, so none of the 51 subjects in the study had nystagmus as their primary condition. But I can say that we have many users who do have nystagmus, for whom eSight works very well. Now, here's a place where, again, I'd make myself a little bit vulnerable in saying we're not exactly sure what the mechanism of physiological action is there, but there's, theories abound, as you might guess. One idea is that because eSight gives you basically a display that's roughly macular size, a little bit bigger, 30 degrees, we have seen evidence of people's nystagmus basically kind of calming down because we're giving them a smaller area of interest to focus on than their entire, 100-degree plus visual field. But again, there are so many things I'd love to do in clinical analysis that we just haven't had the time or money to do. But anecdotally, I can tell you, we do have many people who have nystagmus who use eSight.
Okay, we've had a number of questions that came up again around making sure that how do we make eSight available to patients? How do we share that information? So we certainly have quite a bit of information on our website, but I would strongly recommend that if you're interested in connecting a patient with the opportunity to try eSight, you have Rob and I's email addresses. Since I'm making the offer, I will say call me first so that Rob doesn't get inundated with phone calls, especially given how much you travel. But I think as a step one, you can either connect the family with myself via email or by phone, and we'll make sure that, given that you've already assessed their likelihood, we want to ensure that you get that feedback directly from us too, on whether this is indeed an excellent candidate for eSight, and that you can maintain, that part of the journey, and we'll figure out, whether they make sense for them to try a home trial or for them to come into the office for demonstration if there's another location nearby. So again, I think, and when it comes to payment plans, I know we're getting a couple questions about the assistive devices program. So I am the eternal optimist, and I do believe that eSight one day, like a number of any other innovative assistive devices, will be available on ADP. Today, it's not, and that's a big part of why we have invested in the 3 staff members on our team who work one-on-one with individuals to help support them in accessing the finances that they need to obtain something like eSight. I think we have. I think that's it.
I would also add to what Carly said in terms of what steps potential users can take. If you go to www.esighteyewear.com, our website, in the top corner of that website, there's a button called Begin Your Journey. I think that's what it's called. As impersonal and commercial as that sounds, that gives the person an opportunity to fill out an online form where they give us not only their contact information, but also they can describe a little bit more about their specific visual goals and circumstances and so forth. And In doing all of that, they get into our database, and then somebody on our team of we have this team of people we call vision advocates. They will reach out and connect with that person to discuss next steps with them. So again, it sounds commercial and impersonal, but if they go through that begin your journey exercise on our website, they will definitely be contacted by us.
So this is Cheryl. On behalf of all of the OAO members, I want to thank Rob and Carly for a really informative presentation. And I thank all of the OAO members who joined us for this webinar tonight. We will send all the questions asked with answers. We'll post it on our website in a few days or weeks' time. And thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.